I'm Scott Horsburgh. Welcome to Yelling Up Steading. Today's DVD is all about how to make, fit and hang veneered doors, and also how to ensure that all of the hardware associated with those doors works well. That is your door stops, your lifters and your catches. I'm taking you right back to the start of this Carcass to show you how I inlaid my hinges and how I set them, and I'm then showing you how I started to make and fit these doors, looking at the substrate preparation, how to prepare and fit the lipping, how to prepare and fit the face veneers, how to plane the doors to fit, and then how to hang them. And I'm also showing you how all of the hardware, including the door stops and the door catches, comes into play. And also how that once the door is hung, we can just shoot our stops to ensure that they fit for the finished dimensions of the door, and how we can also incorporate the catches to give us a lovely result like what I have here. I think you're going to get a lot out of this DVD. It's showing you in detail the whole process. Let's get started. Here is the whole carcass dry assembled. This central mini carcass here, with these two vertical rails and the two horizontal rails, has already been glued together, as have the two end frames. The rest of it is just put together dry. Before I glued this central carcass together, underneath here I have routed out for the hinge at each end, because there's two doors here, and I also have a central door stop and two door catches. I routed out those housings and drilled the tapping holes for the screws prior to glue up, because it's very difficult for me to get in and do these accurately once it's glued up. It's much easier when this is just a free panel and I can move it around and get into it easily. So by putting this together dry, I have now just marked with a knife line where these two vertical panels sit, and now I'm going to take it apart and route out for all of the hinges and drill the tapping holes, the two door catches and door stops that sit at each end, and then we will be ready to go. I have already routed out on the base rail here for the door stops and lifters, and as you can see, they just pop into their housing like that. When I have the doors made and I can accurately determine where this back needs to be, and it's shot or sanded to fit perfectly, not fit the hole but fit the width of the door, then I can glue these in. But for the moment they're just loose. So the procedure now is I'm going to take this carcass apart, and we're going to do the rest of the preparation for the fitting of the doors before we glue it up. I've pulled the carcass apart, and now we are ready to inlay the hinges. This is a piece of white birch multiply, and this is one of the doors. I'm going to show you how we're going to veneer this and turn it into a beautiful door. This piece is 12mm thick, and the substrate material for all four doors is going to be the same, 12mm white birch multiply. I have hand cut some veneers on my bandsaw using a resawing jig, and these are the pieces that I'm going to be using to veneer onto this white birch. I cut these at 2.4mm thick, and they're going to finish at around 1.5mm. So I'm going to lose 9/10 of a millimetre, and that is so I can lose most of these bandsaw marks. So if the veneers finish at 1.5mm, and I have to veneer both sides, that's 3mm of veneer on 12mm of board. That means the doors will have a width or a depth of 15mm. So that's what I'm going to base the settings for, setting in my hinges, door lifters and door stops. I'm going to assume that the thickest the doors will be 15. They may be a little bit thinner, so I'm going to take that into consideration. The first thing we're going to do though is to set the hinges so that we can get the carcass together. I'm using these pivot knife hinges, I think they're called. I like these, they're very easy to use, and it makes fitting the door very easy as well. They have a width of 9mm on this section here, which is inlaid into the rail, and I want these to be centred in the door. So if they're 9mm, and we're assuming that the maximum door depth will be 15mm, that gives us 3mm each side. So that I get all of the hinges inlaid uniformly, which will aid me in fitting the doors easily, I'm going to use marking gauges to mark out the straight lines for where the hinges will sit, and then the front edge and the back edge I can easily mark with a square and a marking knife to fit each hinge. They should all be the same, but they may be slightly different. So I have two marking gauges, and both of these have the bevel facing in opposite directions, so that I can mark the outside edge and the inside edge and always have the bevel facing towards the waist, which is where the hinge is going. This first one I've set at 3mm, and this second one I've set at 12mm. The first gauge line will be 3mm from the edge, and the second gauge line will be 12mm from the edge, which means in between the lines is 9mm, which is perfect for this hinge. By using marking gauges, we know that all the hinges are going to be in the same spot. One's not going to be closer to the front edge than the next one. It will enable us to fit the doors very easily. When the carcass was put together, I marked out where the hinges were going, so we know where they're going, and now we can mark out and knife the housing and then route out the housing using this handheld router. I have a 4mm router bit in there, and I will go as close to the knife lines as I dare, and then I will use my chisels and mallet to cut down to the knife lines, and the hinges will fit in perfectly. We're going to start with marking out. So I've placed the hinge very roughly where it's going to go, and all I'm going to do is just slide it up to the line that I marked out when the carcass was together, and I'm just going to put a pencil mark to show me approximately where its length will end. Then I'm going to use the two marking gauges, and I'm going to scribe each line going from length to length up against the outside face. That's the 3mm end, and this is the 12. just a bit deeper. Then I have the two knife lines cut. I know where it's going to fit up on this edge. That's what I marked out when the carcass was fully together. So I have a knife line there already. I'm just going to knife it again. Now if I pop the knife in there, I can slide the square right up to it, and then I can slide the hinge right up to the square, and it will tell me very accurately where the end knife line is. I'm just going to hold it there, and then I can pop the knife up against its edge, its end, and mark out that line. Now that it's there like that, I can also just mark out where the front bit is going to protrude. That's great. So that is the procedure for marking out the housings for the hinges. It's very easy to do. Once you know their location, just use marking gauges to make sure your parallel lines are uniform, and marking out your ends is determined by the size of the hinge. And if you already have a knife line where you know it's going to end, you can pop the knife in there, slide a square up, and then take it away and slide the hinge right up to it, and then mark out the other end. And they're very accurate, they slot in, they look very neat and very crisp. Now I'm going to mark out the rest and then route out the bulk of the waste with the router. So I took it down in 2 goes, 1.5 mil each time, and it took 5 minutes to do all of the 6 remaining hinge housings. And now I am going to clean up to the knife lines with chisels. Chiseling out the waste is very easy because we have knife lines. I'm just going to feel the chisel and feel it drop into the knife line, hold it up upright. I'll try to get out of the light, and just punch it with a mallet. If you're using a razor sharp blade, you will feel it just punch through. It's effortless, and this is Jarrah. This is a dense hardwood, and it just punches through. It's as easy as that. The knife line will guide you all the way. Once you've chopped away all the waste with your chisels and popped the hinges in, there's one last thing that needs to be done, and that is the screw holes, the tapping holes. Now I'm using nice brass screws with a traditional head. These small brass screws are very fragile. Now using the calipers, I can see that the overall width of the shaft on these is 2.72 millimeters, and the internal shaft, which is the tapping hole, which is the main rod minus the thread, is 1.9. So I am going to drill a tapping hole of around 2.3 millimeters. I don't want them to be too tight, but I still need them to bite. Once I've drilled the hole of 2.3 millimeters for each screw, I think that if I went to screw these brass screws straight into that tight tapping hole, there's a very real danger that I'll just shear the heads off these and be stuck with a brass thread in a hole that I can do nothing with, and it's a real headache. You'll only do it once and you'll never do it again. And a way to get around that is to find a steel screw with exactly the same thread pattern and diameter thread, and I have one here. So once I've drilled the tapping hole, I am going to screw the steel screw into all of the holes to pave the way for the brass screw. That way I'm prepping the holes with a strong screw, and when I go to screw the brass one in, it'll still bite, but it won't have that pressure that might shear off the head. I use an awl to just punch a hole in the centre of the screw housing so that I can get them just right. With the ones on the end that can pull out, I tend to choose the hole furthest in and just make it a little bit off centre so that when I'm screwing in, I'm actually pulling that hinge in to this butt end, because if it's the other way, it might pull it out and just leave a bit of a gap there. So I make sure that I pull it in. So that's what I'm going to do now. Using the awl, I mark out the hole just like that, right in the centre of the screw housing, and then I just use a freehand drill to go to the required depth, and it's a tapping hole, not a clearance hole, it's a tapping hole. We need these screws to bite. So I'm going 2.2, 2.3 millimetres. Door stops and stops and lifters. Door stops are the things that we inlay into the carcass that prevent the door from pushing too far inwards. They're a bit like drawer stops. In this sideboard, up at the top, each door will have a door stop, and on the bottom rail, each door will have a door stop and lifter. In this bottom front rail, I have already routed out for 3 door stops and lifters. The 2 central doors share the same stop and lifter. When I say a stop and lifter, what I mean is that it's a piece that is inlaid into the rail. It serves as a door stop, but also a lifter, in that it protrudes above the carcass by about 0.5 millimetre, and the front edge of it is slightly curved, and the purpose it serves is twofold. First of all, it's a door stop, in that it stops the door from pushing too far inwards, and the lifting aspect is there so that if the door does drop slightly, when you go to close it, it will hit the front edge of this curved lifter and just ride up, so that if it does drop, which we're not expecting the door to, but if it does, the lifter will prevent it from rubbing on the polished surface of the rail. I'm going to zoom in and just give you a look at this lifter so you can see the curved front end. And I'm going to just pop it into its housing in the front rail and show you. But before I do that, just to let you know that the overall depth of the lifter is 5.1 mil, and the hole, or the housing in which it sits, I have taken to 4.4 mil. So it's sitting up by about 7/10. Now if that's too high, when it comes to the final fitting, I can just sand this down, or just shoot the bottom of it. It's not difficult. So I'm giving myself a little bit of leeway there. I haven't pushed it all the way in because it'll be difficult for me to get it out. I will do that when it comes to the final fitting. But there it is there. That's where it sits, and when it's down it will protrude about 1/2 mil above the carcass, and when the door comes to close, if it ever does drop, it will prevent it from rubbing on the polished surface throughout there. It will sit on that, and this back shoulder is the door stop. And if I turn it on its side, you may just be able to see how it's just curved at the front. When I made the lifters, I made them all together so they were all exactly the same dimension, and then I just cut them into 3. At the top of the carcass, we're also going to have a door stop. Once again, there's 3 because the 2 central doors are sharing the same stop. These are just very basic little L-shaped pieces of wood, and the key is that when we route out the housings for all of these, we have worked out that we're thinking that our doors will finish at 15 mil, but there's a chance they may be a little bit less. So when we go to inlay these in, we might have this front edge that the door will hit sitting at about 14 mil from the outside of the carcass. So if the doors finish at 15 mil, all we have to do is shoot 1 mil off that front edge, and we can actually adjust these to suit the thickness of the doors when the doors are complete. So now we're going to route the housings for the door stops. Once again, when it comes to setting these in, because it would be nice to have them all consistent, I'm going to use a marking gauge. I have set my pencil gauge at 14 mil, just so I can put a little line along this front piece of jarrah, which is a front rail of the carcass, just so I can pop the door stop on to see roughly where it's going to sit. And I have set my marking gauge to then suit where the front edge of the housing will be to accommodate this stop in that position. And I'm going to just mark around the rest of it with a marking knife. So there it is, sitting in there. It's just a very small door stop. It's 10 mil from the end here, and if I pop the ruler on, you'll see that it's about 13.5 millimeters in, and that's perfect. It means that if the doors are any bigger than 13.5 mil, which they will be, we can just shoot this front end until we take it back until the doors fit perfectly against the front of the carcass. It's just a neat little square hole, and stop just pops in, pushes down, and then when the doors are made and everything is finalised, I can shoot the front of the stop to suit the width of the door, the thickness of the door, and then once I'm happy with the door placement, I can then glue this in. The last thing we have to do now is to create a housing for our beautiful little handmade door catches. This is a sort of a James Krenoff detail to cabinet making. I really like it. I like the fact that you can make your own hardware. I think it adds a lot to the piece. And these catches work really well. I'll zoom in and give you a closer look. It's a very basic shape. It has a countersunk drill hole on the top for the screw to go in, and underneath there is a drill hole housing for a spring, and I have just used springs out of an ordinary ballpoint pen. Spring pops in, you create a housing in the carcass, and the tapping hole is not too tight. It bites, but it enables this to just have a little bit of leeway, and it pivots up and down on the spring. When the doors close, they push on the front and they drive it into the carcass, and as you can see, there's a V shape here, and there's a corresponding concave V in the top of the door, and it rides in, and then when it gets to the right spot, it's eventually popping out, and it just pops out into the V of the door, and it pulls the door in to the door stops, and there's this lovely wood on wood sound of the doors closing. They work really well and they look great. So there it is. It's got a countersunk clearance hole for the screw. If I turn it over, you can see that there's another hole to house the spring, and it's a lovely sort of V shape. Now we just have to create the housings for the door catches, and then we're pretty much done for the carcass work. Now with a pencil gauge, I could mark a pencil line 7.5mm from the outside face here, so that the apex of that V could pop straight in line with that midway point. But I've made these so that the back end is flush with the back end of this jarrah, and that puts that point midway at 7.5mm from the front, and I'm going to place it about there. The thickest point on the catch is from the apex to the underside. If I measure these with calipers, it comes in at 7.6mm. I'm going to route a housing 7.7mm deep, so that basically this catch can disappear completely. I'm not going to taper the housing, it's going to be the same throughout, and there will be a little drilled housing in that housing for the catch to house the spring as well, so that it doesn't slide around. It's held very firmly in place and it stays exactly where it is, and it just goes up and down. When I made these catches, I needed 4, so I made them all together on the one piece, shaped the whole piece together, and then using my fine dovetail saw, I cut 4 individual catches. So they're all exactly the same. And I'm going to take the housings all exactly the same as well. So now I'm going to mark out very carefully around this with a knife, and I'm going to take that down gradually with the plunge router, that little handheld router, to a depth of 7.7mm. I'm going to drill a housing for the spring and a tapping hole for the screw, and I'll show you how beautifully these work. In routing out to a depth of 7.7mm, I went down in 5 stages, taking, around 1.5 mils each time, just creeping down gradually as close to the line as I dared. Now it's the same as what has been done previously, and I'm sorry if I'm in the shadow line. I've got knife lines there. I'm a little bit away with the router, so I'm just going to go 0.5 mil inside the knife line and take that first cut. Same there, I'm not on the knife line, I'm just inside it. You can hear the different sound the chisel makes when you get to the bottom of the routed hole. Okay, I'm going to feed it into the knife line. Hold it vertical and just punch it straight down. Same again there, a little bit further down. I'm going to go to the other side. What I have in here now is just big chunks of clean cut jarrah. Look at those. Other side, a little bit far away as well. So I'm just going to take off that. If you're a bit far from the knife line and you punch and you try to take it, there's a danger that you might just bruise in from the knife line. Here we go, straight to the bottom. Ooh. It's just a matter of creeping up and not rushing. Okay, I have the drill bit for the spring housing already in the drill, so I'm going to do that first. So I've marked it out with an awl. It's very difficult to actually see. There it is. I'm just going to take that down. I'm going to change the bit over to the tapping hole bit. There we go. So now let's just finish it off. Pop the spring in the catch. Here is the catch in position. You can see that it just pivots up and down on the spring. And having the screw enables you to very easily adjust the amount of bite that is on the catch. If that is protruding up a little bit too high when I fit the doors, I can just tighten that screw and it will push the whole thing down a little bit further and therefore reduce the amount of bite that the catch has on the door. They work really well. Here's the second one, fitted. So once again, the amount of bite on the door can easily be adjusted by the tightening or the loosening of the spring. Now we come to making the veneered doors. So the first thing I've done is I have measured the dimension of the doors very accurately in the carcass. The first thing that we really need to do when it comes to making the doors is prepare the substrate material. So I know that I'm going to have to lip all of the edges before I do the face veneers. And I know that my lipping is going to be no more than 1/8 of an inch or 3 mil thick. And that's what I'm going to base it on. Let's say 1/8 of an inch, 3 mil. So I have an accurate dimension of all of the door sizes. So if I take a 3 mil lip off all of the edges, I can then cut the substrate to size. So I have cut the substrate to size based on the fact that I'm going to have a 3 mil lip around all of the edges. The lipping that I am preparing is basically going to be tongue and groove. It is a 3 mil lip with a tongue that is going to slot into a groove that is going to be cut around all of the edges so that it's nice and tight, and it's the proper way to do solid edged lipping. So using my router table and a 4 mil diameter router bit, I selected a face side for all of the doors, and the face side I selected as being the outside face. I then set the fence on my router table so that the router bit was perfectly central on all of the edges. And I then routed all of the edges to a depth of 5mm. So I took 3 cuts, gradually creeping deeper. So I cut a groove on all of the doors to a depth of 5mm using a 4mm router bit, so that I could then use my router table to cut some lipping. The lipping material that I'm using is 2mm wider than the doors, so that if I actually prepare a tongue perfectly central on this piece and I slot that in, it will protrude on each side by 1mm, and then I can plane it down flush. So I used my router table again, and using pieces like this, of this dimension, I cut each side down to a depth of 4.8mm with a tongue that fitted perfectly snugly into the groove. I don't want it too loose and I don't want it too tight, I want it just right, because it needs to be firm so that the glue will adhere and it will never come free. On a piece like this, I cut both sides. I then set a fence on my bandsaw so that I could cut away 4mm along each side, so that I then had 1mm to plane off to remove bandsaw marks and get them just right. So all of these pieces in front of me on the bench are the lipping. There's the tongue. The procedure for the lipping, here's one that I glued last night. I've planed it down to 3mm. It's got a lovely clean face on it, which is now the edge of this door. And it's protruding by 1mm, which I will then plane flush. This is the bottom, by the way. My procedure for lipping the doors is I'm doing the bottom edge first, and then I'm going to cut this flush. Then I'm doing the 2 vertical edges from the bottom up flush with the top. I will cut that flush and then I will do the top. I'm trying to minimise the visual impact of end grain. You have to see some end grain somewhere, but you won't see it along the top. You'll only see that little bit on the side next to the top, but that's minimal. It'll be nice and tight anyway, so it'll look good. This is one that I've already planed flush, and I'm going to plane them flush as I go. So my next procedure is to then cut this one flush with the sides, pop in the 2, glue in the 2 vertical edges, then I will plane those flush, and then I will do the top, and then I will plane that flush, and it's all lipped and ready for face veneer. Now when these doors go into their opening, they will actually be a snug fit. So I will then just plane these off to fit gradually so that I get the fit that I desire. I don't want it loose, I don't want it too sloppy, and I don't want it too tight. So here is a piece of 3mm lipping that I planed flush last night, and this is a piece of lipping right here. This is the piece this is the tongue that gets glued in, and that is just the rough sawn, band sawn face that I will plane down to 3mm. In planing the lipping down to 3mm, I just pop it in my vise like that, and being careful to try and balance it well. This is just removing all of the bandsaw marks. I actually have a fairly rugged shaving set. It's not a particularly fine cut, but straight grain jarrah, so it's not giving me any tear out. So it's okay to do this. Now, all I'm going to do is just check it with calipers as well and have a really good look at it to make sure that I'm keeping it parallel and uniform. That's the most important thing. But that's all it is. You can see those shavings are quite thick. Planing the lipping flush is just a matter of being careful and just taking them down. Just be careful when you get to the back end where it joins perpendicular to the next one. It's just like flushing joinery. Well, it is flushing joinery, so just make sure that you go with the grain of the one that runs perpendicular. So I just take them down gradually, just like that. I cut this end grain piece that protrudes a little over length. I cut that off with my dovetail saw, and then I just use my hand plane again just to tidy up that end grain cut and take it perfectly flush with the other horizontal lipping. It's very easy. I just make sure that I have my plane balanced, and I'm just taking very fine cuts just to clean it up and make it nice and neat. So there's just a shot of the way it will look. It's nice and flush, it's very neat, it's a tight join, and all of the lipping is tongue and grooved, so it's very strong. If I turn this around, you might be able to see the groove there. So I've got one more piece to go into this, which is the top section, which I am now going to cut to fit in there. I will glue that in, and then once that's in, I will flush the top and the bottom of that and make sure it's nice and flushed on its joinery. To fit this top piece of lipping into the rebaited groove, I just need to take about 4mm off the tongue itself, and I just use my dovetail saw. Sorry if I'm in the light here, but all I do is line it up and take the cut. I take it out, and then I just hold it, and I just cut the tongue off. This small central door here has the bottom piece of lipping, which is cut flush with the substrate. Then the two sides have come on, which go from the bottom edge of the lipping right up to the top. So you won't see any end grain, just long grain there. But I don't want you seeing end grain on the top of the door. So this final piece of lipping will slot in there like that. It's oversized, as you can see. I'm going to glue this in, then I'm going to flush the sides, cut it to length, plane it, and that should fit very snugly into the door opening in the carcass. Then I'm going to plane both of these central doors to fit, so they are a perfect fit together. So now I have already flushed all of these three pieces that I've already glued in, and now I'm going to glue this final piece of lipping on. With these particular doors, because they're veneered, I'm actually going to be taking an extra step in the fitting process. If this were a solid door or a frame and panel door, once it's together, it would be very slightly oversized, and I would just simply plane it to fit. But with these doors, I'm going to do a preliminary fit on this panel without the veneer, just so that it's still oversized, but it fits into the opening. And the reason I'm going to be doing that is because once I have veneered both sides, I want to minimise the amount of planing to fit as much as I possibly can. So that's why I'm going to do a fit with this panel first. I'm going to show you how I'm going to do my preliminary fit, but while I'm sitting here I'll just explain it to you as well. It's the same for every door that I fit, whether it be veneered, solid, frame and panel, it doesn't matter. I start with the bottom and I sit it on the rail or wherever it's going in the carcass to make sure that it's sitting nice and flatly. So I start with the bottom, then I push it up against the hinge side so I can see that the gap is uniform and that it's butting up to that side perfectly, accurately and uniformly. If it's not, I will plane where I need to plane to make sure that happens. The third part is the top, making sure that the top then is fitting snugly and the gaps are uniform, and the last side is the side that butts up to the other frame, or in this case where it's a central door, the other door. I will take that down to fit as the final piece in the puzzle. So right now, before we veneer both of these sides and do our final fitting, and then putting in the hinges and having a beautiful door, we're just going to do a first fit to make sure that it'll still be oversized, but just to make sure that it fits into the opening, so that once the veneers are on, we're minimising the amount of planing that we're going to be doing. Because the veneers will run long grain from top to bottom, so the bottom edges are end grain. I don't want to have to take off 2 mil off each bottom to make it fit. I want to just take off the bare minimum. So let's have a look and do the first preliminary fit. So you can see that I've got 3 of the doors made and hung. Now, and I'm going to show you how to do this last one. The reason I have this one on as well is to show you how to plane this to fit there, and it also gives us the datum surface for this door so that we get a nice uniform gap down the centre. So it won't fit in because it's slightly oversized. So the first thing I look at is how it sits on this bottom rail. I want it to be nice and flat. I don't want it sitting with one end up or like that. It's got to be sitting nice and flat, and it is. So I'll just sit it there like that, and then I will push it up so that it butts up against this hinging style here. Now what I'm looking for there is for it to be touching right the way through. If it's not, I will need to plane this piece accordingly to make sure that happens. Using a hand plane, it's very easy to do. Now that is sitting nice and sweetly. Now you can see that the door won't pop in because it's about 0.5 mil oversize on height. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the height down so that it will just ease in, and I'm going to leave this side oversize so that we can take that down when the door is in. We can mark it and take it down accordingly. So there you go, you can see the doors, and just to show you, I haven't put any handles on, so it's a bit tricky getting these doors open, but with this door here I actually have placed in the stop and the lifter there and the stop on the top, so that if you listen, it's got that nice woody sound when it closes. Because these doors are so small, I can very easily use my shooting board to help me plane these down to fit accurately. Now, I've already covered the use of the shooting board in the DVD hand planing and shooting techniques, so I'm not going to go and explain it to you in too much detail. So this is the top, and I know it's the top because I've got the end grain here. I always know that this is the top. And I'm going to plane this top down so that it just eases into that opening. So it's very straightforward. I'm just going to pop it on the shooting board. And take it down like that. It's so easy. It was about 1/2 mil oversize, so these shavings are very thin. I think they'd be around 1/20 of a mil, so I don't have too many shavings to take to have it fit. So after I've done 5 shavings, I'll go and check it. If it needs more, I'll come back and I'll just do it, but I'm taking it down gradually so that it's just going to pop in. It'll still be too large, but it'll just pop in. When you are planing doors to fit, drawers to fit, when you're planing anything to fit into an opening, it's just a matter of patience and always checking. If when I placed this door into the opening, I found that I needed to take more off one end and less off the other to make it fit, then it's just a matter of marking that, knowing where you need to take wood off. And if I was using the shooting board and I needed to take more off the front end and less off here, I could start here, bring it through and then just lift it off, slide it away until I got that to the point where I could then take a uniform cut. And if it was the same, if I needed to take more off this back end and less off here, I can start it midway in and take a couple of cuts just off here, check it, and when I've got it to a position where I can take a through cut, I will take a through cut. It's just a little bit of patience and constant checking. The panel now fits in very nice and very snugly. So now it is ready for the face veneers. So first of all, we will glue the inside face veneers. When they have gone off and the glue is set, I will just use my docking saw to trim the veneer to within 1 mil of this edge, and then we'll veneer the outside face. I will also trim those veneers to within 1 mil of the edge, and then we will use the hand plane to plane it for its final fit and fitting of hinges. Now, in the DVD on hand planing and shooting techniques, I showed you how to shoot veneers. So I'm not going to go into it in too much depth. These, I've selected the way I would like these inside veneers to go. They're going to go like that. So now I'm just going to fold them together like a book, pop them down, and because they're nice and small, I'm going to use my shooting board to shoot this edge, fold it out, and then tape it for veneering. So just make sure they're together. Now the edges aren't square, so they're not going to sit up against this back fence truly. Now all I'm going to do is initially just take a couple of through shavings to make sure that I'm getting a clean cut right the way through. You can have a look at the shavings that are coming out, and they're long and thin, so that's good. You can also just have a look at the edge and just ensure that it's a nice clean cut, which it is. So now I'm just going to take 2 or 3 hollowing shavings to make sure that I have absolutely no bumps. So that's starting, say, 10 mil in, going along and just kicking off when I get to within 10 mil of the edge. And pretty soon it won't cut, and it's almost not cutting there because I've created that hollow. Now I'm going to take 2 through shavings, and this is ready to be taped and then glued. Now this is my outside face, so I'm just going to turn these boards over, and I'm going to use some blue tape to tape that join together, making sure that I hold it nice and tightly together. I'm going to tape down that join. It's just to fix these together so that when I turn it over I can have a look and see if I'm happy with the join that I have. So I've taped it together. I'm going to turn it over, and now I can have a look and just see if I am happy with that, which I am. Now I'm going to use veneering tape to veneer this together. I'm just going to make it, it has gum, so it needs to be wet. I'm just going to run it through the sponge, which is moist. I'm going to place it down . This will hold those veneers nice and tight. So now that I have taped the outside face, I can turn this over and remove this blue tape, because this is the glue side, and it is ready to be glued to the substrate. A vacuum veneering system is the easiest way to glue veneers to a substrate, but I don't have one yet. So what I will be using is basically just weights and clamps. I have 2 16mm sheets of MDF that I have sitting on top of each other. Then I'll place the substrate down, roll some glue on it nice and evenly, pop this veneer onto the substrate, put another sheet of 16mm MDF onto the veneered surface, sandwich the veneer and substrate between the boards of MDF, and then put 60 kilos of weights and a shed full of clamps on that to make sure that it's got plenty of pressure to glue it down and bring it home. So while the inside veneers are being glued to the substrate and setting as they are now, I'm going to do exactly the same procedure on the outside face veneers, and that is fold them together like a book, shoot the edge, get it nice and straight, tape it together, and then it is also ready to be glued. Here is the door all glued up, and as you can see I have trimmed the edges of the veneer on my docking saw. I'm still a fair way off, but it means that I can now start to shoot these edges or plane these edges and get it close so that we can now plane this door to fit. When I am fitting the door, you will notice that at the top and the bottom, where it's sitting, it will be sitting on these two white strips. These are just pieces of paper that I've then covered with sellotape, and I've got two for the bottom and two for the top. The reason I have those is because these pivot hinges have a washer in between these two leaves, so that when you have the base part inlaid into the carcass flush, and the same with this top bit going into the doors flush, it leaves a gap so that the doors won't rub on the carcass. It's about 1/2 mil or 0.6 of a millimetre. So these shims that I've made just slot in there nicely and equate to that gap. So when I am planing the door to fit and I'm getting close, I'm going to be sitting these on the carcass so that the door can sit on them and give me that gap. And then on the top, I will need to be able to slide these in before I start to fit the hinges. But right now, we're going to clean up these edges so that the veneer is then flush with the lipping, and as we know, it will slot in but it will still be oversized, and then we will start to plane this to fit, and that's what we're going to do right now. These central smaller doors are small enough that I can shoot not only the end grain but the long grain on my shooting board. But when I was doing the two outside tall doors, I could shoot the end grain on my shooting board, but they were too long to use on this board. So just to let you know, what I did to plane the long grain on those to fit was I had one end held firmly in my vise, and then I had a long sash clamp going across my bench to hold the other end. So it was nice and firm, and I could then just stand up and use my hand plane to plane the long grain edges. So I'm going to start with the end grain, top and bottom. This is the bottom bit. I have 3 nice sharp blades ready to go. So I'm just going to take these down until I get to the lipping. You have to use sharp blades because this is end grain here, and I don't want any tear out. I want these to be perfect. So this bottom end I have now flushed with the lipping, and now I'm doing the top. You just have to watch, because I trimmed these with the docking saw, I might not have the veneer protruding evenly over the lipping at each end. So I'm just watching, and if I need to take a little bit more off here, then I'm just adjusting what I'm doing accordingly. So I've done the top and the bottom and this side here. Now I'm just doing this final side, and then we can start really planing it to fit. So there is the door planed to fit. You can see that there are the 2 shims at the bottom and at the top, which will enable the hinges to fit and for them not to bind. Those shims represent the thickness of the washer between the 2 hinge leaves. So I'll just get that one out of the way. So there it is there. Now it's over width. we still have to plane this, but the next step is to plane the front and the back faces to remove the tape, remove any tear out and make sure that they're nice and flat, and then we can inlay the hinges and do the first hang. And once it's hung, we will then plane this side to fit. So right now we're going to plane the inside and outside face veneers. In planing the face veneers flat, I will be frequently checking with the straight edge just to make sure I'm not introducing any bumps and lumps. I want these to be as flat as possible. The reason that we plane both faces before we set in the hinges is because when we set the hinges, the outside face is our datum surface. The marking gauges here have been set for the hinges based on the settings of the carcass. So if we set the hinges in now and then maybe planed 1/2 mil off the face veneers, the door would be sitting in 1/2 mil inside the carcass. So we're going to clean these up and get them to a point where we're very happy, and then we can set the hinges. Then if we come along later and even give these a very light sand with 320 and then 400, the amount that we take off will be negligible. So we're going to plane these first. I've put a fresh blade in the plane because the grain on these faces is quite interlocking. On the inside it's nice and straight. Now it's just like planing up any other piece of wood. We're going to be frequently checking and getting it as flat as we possibly can. Going down the middle because this side veneer is actually a little bit higher than this one here. So we're almost there with this top bit. You can see there's a little bit of tape still left. The join down the middle is beautiful, no glue line at all, and there's still a couple of spots where I can see a little bit of tear out. So I'm going to persevere and keep going. In hand planing, you get to really feel the wood. For example, when I'm planing this section here, it's a lot easier. When I come up to these parts here where the colour changes and there's a couple of knots, I really slow down and just ease over the knots gently, because I can feel that if I rush through, there's a danger that I might get some tear out. So hard, this jarrah. It's very dense wood. I have a very fine finishing cut shaving now. This wood is absolutely glowing. And these shavings are just, you could read a newspaper through them. I have no tear out in this board. It's nice and flat. Just a little bit of tape left in a couple of spots. So I'm going to continue on with this until I just lose these last two little remnants of tape. Then I will do the other side, and I'll pop it in, we'll have a look, and it will be ready for us to inlay the hinges. Here you can see the beautiful finish that is starting to show on this piece. It's just beautiful. There's no tear out, it's lovely book match jarrah, but with a lot of character. Now we come to inlaying the hinges. I'm going to use these two marking gauges to help me locate where the hinge will sit. This one really is the most important one. This is coming from the front face side. So that is really the most important mark that I'm looking for. I can use my marking knife if need be to mark out the other inside end, but this marking gauge will do the job for me as well. Then I'm going to use the square to mark off the ends. I will hold this square firmly up against the end of the door like that and just push the hinge up to it, and then hold the hinge and mark off its inward spot. I'm going to use these two chisels to take out the waste. I won't be using the router for the doors. I'll just be chiseling down gradually and slowly. These are freshly sharpened. And then once I have the hinge inlaid in, I will use my awl to mark out the locations of the screws, drill them down, and then once again use a steel screw to really tap that hole and pave the way for a brass screw. I don't want it shearing off. So first things first, I'm going to mark this out and then start to chisel out the waste. So I'm going to use this marking gauge to mark out the placement for the hinge. Now when you use these marking gauges, you really need to make sure that you've got it firmly up against this face side. You don't want to tilt it like that. So make sure it's right up against there, and then you can use it to mark out the location. The key is not to rush, just to take your time and take it down bit by bit. Now, I've got sharp chisels, and I'm going to be moving this a lot, but I am going to just be taking down bit by bit. Now I'm going to do exactly the same on the other end, and once this hinge is in, we are ready for our first preliminary hang of the door. Once you have prepared the housings for your hinges, you are ready to do the first preliminary hang of the door. Now these pivot hinges are so easy to use. I have screwed the hinges into the carcass, and these leaves that screw into the door are just sitting over that top rod. So now I can just slide the door into these hinges, and I'm just going to sit the bottom one on and locate the top one, and then just slide the door in. There it is. Now once I have it like that, I've got two screws here. I can just put a screw in each hinge. One just holding it at the top, and then one on the bottom. And then we can see how well the door opens and closes. Okay, so let's open this one and get that out of the way. So there's no rubbing. Looks like it's got a nice gap at the bottom and a reasonable gap at the top. It's working well. Now if we bring this one in, we're also looking to see how they line up along the top and along the bottom. So from your angle there, you will be able to see a bit better than me. And then all we need to do is now just trim these doors so that there's a nice uniform gap down the centre. And we're probably going to be better off just having this slightly angled from the outside to the in. There you go. It's looking really good. I took both of these doors off and popped them in the vise on my workbench, and then I have just planed down this long grain edge on each side here to get this nice fit. I've also angled them back slightly towards the inside so that I can get a nice, reasonably tight closing edge, and they still close without touching and rubbing. So I've just angled that slightly back in. It's just a matter of constantly going from your workbench where you might be taking 2 or 3 very fine shavings and then just sliding it back onto the hinges. With these pivot hinges, you really don't have to even fix the screws in, because you can just slide it onto the hinges and make sure it's butted right up to where it will be, and then you can just easily have a test fit. I will also show you that I placed this bottom stop and lifter in, and it was actually a perfect fit for these doors. So that one is in. The top stop I have yet to put in. I'm going to show you how I'm going to do that now. But before I do, I just want to zoom in and give you a closer look at these details. You can hear that when it's actually closing and hitting the bottom stop and lifter. So here is this central stop and lifter, and you can see that it just protrudes above this carcass rail by about 0.5 millimetre, and it's got a curved front edge so that if the doors ever drop, which I'm not expecting they ever will, but it's just a nice detail, and it's there that if the doors do drop, they will never rub on this polished surface. They will always just hit this. So they're not actually touching it, it just hits the stop. They're not rubbing on that lifter. It's a fraction of a millimetre clearance between the bottom of the door and the lifter. This is the top door stop. When I placed this into its housing and closed both of the doors, they were hitting this stop and finishing about 1 mil proud of the carcass. So because the bottom door stop and lifter is now in place and it's right, it means the doors weren't actually touching that bottom door stop because they were hitting this one first. So as I explained, I made this so that it would be over length, so that now when the doors are in and they've been fitted, all I need to do is shoot this front edge until I get the perfect fit. That is, I will take this down and I'll just keep popping it into the carcass until I close the doors and they hit this stop and the bottom stop at the same time and everything is sweet. So it's just a matter of popping it on the shooting board, and it's the same techniques that I've been using right throughout this whole process. I'm just going to shoot this to fit. So I'm just going to slide the catch up into the corner like that and just run the plane through. Take a few like that and then I will go and pop it back in the carcass and see what result I get. So here is the top door stop now shot to fit, and it was just a matter of me going to and fro from the shooting board to the carcass, popping it in and closing the doors and making sure that they hit both the bottom stop and the top stop simultaneously. So that now just pops in there. When you close the doors, it's hitting both stops. And there you go. So the last thing that we need to do now is to fix in the door catches. And the whole idea of the door catch is that when the door is closed, it will engage and it will pull the door into the stops. So I have the door catch here, which is the one that was fitted to this door here, for this door here up in this carcass side. All we have to do to fit this catch now is to cut the concave V in the top of the door, and then it is done. So I'm going to screw this in and fix this into the carcass, and remember it's deep enough so that when the door is closed the catch can't fully disappear into the carcass. It's the spring that will keep it coming down. So I'm going to pop it in and close the door and just have a look at the front where it's engaging and accurately mark, just with 2 pencil lines, where this catch will engage in this door, so I know where to cut the concave V shape. And I also know that I cut these so that they would be central in the door. All I'm doing here with the chisel is just very carefully angling in from both sides. And I'll give it a very light sand if need be, but I will try and just get a nice clean cut with the chisel. You can see that it's just a very small concave V cut to correspond with the shape of the catch. So I'm just going to do my best to get a nice, I'm trying to stay out of the light here for you, just going to do my best to get a nice clean cut straight off the chisel. I'm not going to put any finish on this at the moment. I'm just going to see how it works. The whole idea is we want this to pull into the stops. So let's give it a fit and see how it works, and if it's fine, once I have created a housing to hold whatever door handle I'm going to use, then I will finish this door. but this DVD is all about just making and fitting the doors, and you can use whatever door hardware you would consider appropriate. Let's try this for a fit. So the stop is in and the catch is in there. We've got the door fitted. So there you go. That is working beautifully. Pull it out. And you can hear that engage and pull the door into the two stops. That's a really beautiful result. So all you need to do now to finish the job is to fix the door handles that you would like, and then to finish the door completely. Finish as in polish, and you're done. I hope you found this DVD beneficial and enjoyed it as much as I've enjoyed making it. Thanks very much. Bye for now.